Good evening, everyone. We are now into lecture 10, and today we're going to cover data governance, which basically describes where the data come from, whether are we able to trust the data, how do we link the multiple data sources which comes from our enterprise, and who are the ones who understand the data and who are the ones that's going to make use of the data to help in decision making. So some of the topics that we'll cover today include data governance, the risk of data compromises. Alright, so what it means is that whenever data is being leaked, okay, what are some of the issues that will come into play? And what are the data governance domains that we will have to take note? So by now, we are all well aware of the benefits of business analytics. So for example, in the case of Visa, alright, in 2005, they analyzed roughly 2% of its transactions data over 40 attributes as a sample for the entire transaction set. 8 years down the road, 2013, Visa analyzes 100% of its transaction data, and the number of attributes that it examines has increased to 200. So in short, it's actually examining 5 times the number of attributes that it did 5 years ago. Alright, so 100% of its data has been analyzed, and the number of attributes has rose by 5 times. So why are they doing that? Okay, so they do that because they want to be able to sift through the tons of data that they have to detect fraudulent transactions, okay, by increasing the amount of data it analyzes. So when the more data you have, the more analysis you do, the chances of detecting abnormalities, which is basically a possible fraudulent case. So they are willing to spend the time, effort and money to actually do this analytics to help them in detecting fraudulent transactions. In the case of Citibank, they have improved the quality of its consumer loan portfolio by hiring IBM Watson, a supercomputer, as a financial advisor. So what it does is that IBM Watson is able to, based on the individual client profile, is able to act as a financial advisor to give financial advice. Is able to help the customer predict its financial situation, alright, the loans that the customer is eligible to take, and so on. So with all this data collected, what it means for the bank is that it's also able to better predict potential loan defaults and fraudulent cases by looking at the market conditions, the applicant's live events, alright, some of the past cases or decisions that we made on this particular customer. So in short, with a lot more data and with the use of data analytics, Citibank was able to reduce the number of default cases, the number of fraudulent cases that it faced. So in data analytics, business analytics, alright, what we are doing is to be able to convert data into a strategic business asset. Alright, starting from the very low level, descriptive diagnostic analytics, to predictive analytics, alright, to prescriptive analytics. So in descriptive analytics, we talk about what happened, alright, why did it happen, so what has happened in the past, in short. In predictive analytics, based on the past data, we try to understand what is going to happen in the future. We have to predict, okay, based on the past trends, what is going to happen in the future. And for prescriptive analytics, that is where we do optimization. So in predictive analytics, we set a target and we allow the system to advise us on how can we reach the target that we have set. So throughout all this, all this life cycle from descriptive analytics all the way to prescriptive analytics, what we have to take note is that the confidentiality of the data, alright, is being maintained at all times. And we are only able to do this if the data is accurate, timely, complete, and secure. And these are very important aspects. So if your data is inaccurate, your data is false, or your data is outdated, you put it into a model, you put it in your analytics model, the decisions that you are going to make, okay, is not going to be good, because the model that is being built is built upon inaccurate data, which is not what we want. Okay, so in order to ensure that we have accurate, timely, complete, secure data, we need to be able to govern the data that we handle. Okay, right from the point of time where we collect the data. So where you collect the data, that is very important. You need to collect them in a standard format. You need to collect the data attributes that you need. Okay, so you need to design the collection of data carefully, the storage of data, who has the rights to access the data, how are you going to use the data, and so on. So all these have been have to be decided upfront, and they all come under data governance. So what is data governance? Alright, so in data governance, basically what we are looking at is really the responsibilities and the practices for handling data within a company. Alright, so who handles what, who is responsible for what, when the data is inaccurate, who do we look for, when there is a data leakage, who do we look for. So as part of the data governance, all these people who are responsible for each of these tasks are clearly well defined, and in subsequent slides we describe exactly who these people are and what are their roles. So as part of the good practices, we also determine the processes and the standards for collecting data, what standards to use, how do we store them, where do we store them, etc. So in every organization, in the top left hand corner, in terms of organization, alright, first thing we do, we set up a data governance council, which basically assigns the organization responsibilities. They decide who will be the data owners, who will be the data stewards, etc. And with these appointment holders at the top right hand corner, we need to decide what are the roles and responsibilities each of them play. Who is responsible for data security to ensure no leakage of critical data, who is responsible for the integrity of the data, and so on. And then we have a documentation. Alright, so for every data analytics exercise, we need to be able to maintain the documentations to know what are the data we collect, why do we collect them, and so on. So the purpose is simple. We only with proper documentations, another party can come in, look at the documents, and fully understand what the data analytics project is all about. And lastly, in terms of data lineage, alright, so you need to operationalize it. So when you collect data from different sources, you need to be able to link them together. So for example, in a MNC, a big company, alright, we have HR, we have finance, we have customer service, different departments. So how do we operationalize it and link the data collected from different departments together? So that is what we refer to as operationalize. So to do all these things definitely requires a significant amount of effort, and but there are definitely benefits that comes with it, especially when you're dealing with big bulks of data. You need to govern them properly. Alright, so when we have proper data governance, what it means is that we will have a better and consistent decision making. Okay, we protect the needs of data stakeholders, have appropriate standards, alright, to handle data, manage the risk, designate accountability for handling data, and improve data security. So improving data security, accountability, okay, these are key elements that every data governance look into. So for example, if someone accesses the data that he or she is not supposed to access, we need to know, and we need to know how to deal with it. Alright, and with data coming in from different sources, how do we ensure that they are accurate? How do we integrate them, harmonize them, make sure that they conform to the same standards? So all these are supposed to be documented as part of the data governance. So in terms of data sources today, alright, we have plenty. The human generated, where you can just type it, write it, scan it, take a photos. These are all human generated data. The other type of data that is being generated is really those which are machine generated. For example, your weather monitoring, your destinations of phone calls. So so for example, whenever you call into a bank, a customer service hotline, very often you hear that this call will be recorded for quality assurance and training purposes. So this is basically machine generated data, because from what you have input into the system, it's basically recorded down, and it actually forms new data for analysis. Okay, content data. Alright, so there are two types of data as well. Content data is basically could be textual or coded. Textual could be things like our text files, our Microsoft Word documents. In short, these are human readable text documents. Coded, coded could come in the form of images or audio. Alright, so they don't come in words, but they come in the form of pictures. They come in the form of a sound, and we have to learn how to store all this information. And apart from content data, we also have metadata, which describes the attributes of the content data. So I think metadata is basically like a dictionary. Basically, it tells you what each and every attribute in the data collection is about. What kind of standards, unit standards does it take? And more importantly, what each and every single row of attributes are meant for. So this is the list of stakeholders that we look at in data governance. The data owners, who is the one that owns the data. Alright, so usually these are the guys that so-called have ownership on the data. They are the ones who grant access for other parties to come in to use the data. As such, alright, if one day there is a data leakage, alright, or whatever you're not supposed to share, it's actually being shared out, this data owner has to account for it, because this data owner is supposed to know who who he has shared the data with, and be able to track back should there be a compromise. Then there's also the data suppliers. The data suppliers are the one who gather data from the data owners and supply them to third parties. Alright, so in today's context, data is very precious. Alright, so in fact, for some companies, they need the data but they don't have it. They can't even purchase the data that they need to help them in the analysis. And then we also have data stewards. So data stewards are the ones who set the policies, the standards, the architectures, or define how we actually collect all the data, how we collate and evaluate issues or problems with the data, and how do we mediate with the stakeholders involved. And lastly, the data consumers. These are the ones, these are the end users. They manage, transform, they store or they use the data. So at one glance, we see the data governance oversight board. Alright, so what I must clarify here is that not every single company would have it, but typically in companies which is very in a business which is very heavily reliant on data, they collect tons of data, and they need to collect it in a proper manner. They usually have a data governance oversight board. Alright, so and what they do is that they define organization-wide data governance strategies and policies. They decide what are the resources to be placed in every single analytics project. They are also the project sponsors. Okay, they provide the funds for the data analytics projects to be carried out. So typically, what I can say is that whenever you need to implement a data analytics project, chances are that you have to seek approval from the data governance oversight board, who actually will have to decide whether to sponsor the project. And should they decide to sponsor the project, they will then appoint a data governor who defines the framework for this governing this data. They sponsor the projects and evaluates the outcomes. We also appoint a chief information security officers to see to the security issues that come with the data. And then we have the chief data steward who ensures the data quality. How do we collect the data? What are the units that we are supposed to use? Implement policies on how we are going to allow access to the data, interface with the data suppliers, and set priorities and so on. So, and then one level down, you see the different lines of business. So basically these are the different departments, which can be HR, finance, procurement, and so on. Okay, so there are different departments that probably have different needs of data analytics, and the data steward is the one who actually has to supply the data to these different lines of business. Okay, and of course the data stewards at the line of business we have to adhere to the rules and conditions that are being laid down by the data governor and as well as the data steward. So what happens, okay, if we compromise our data? Okay, what are some of the risks? Okay, legal and compliance risks. Okay, you might be unable to meet legal and compliance requirements. This is especially so when you're talking about healthcare studies. Okay, well, if you are studying some medical conditions, chances are that you'll never be allowed to disclose who that patient is, and most of the time you will not disclose his age and so on. So you usually use a range. Okay, so for example, instead of 58 years old, we might have an age range of 55 to 60. Okay, the gender, okay, male or female. All right, so I think in short, the data usually will not disclose the identity of the patient because that is a confidentiality issue. Okay, and in terms of data, especially disclosure, something to do with trade secrets, etc. It must be, we must take care not to disclose any of this, okay, because it concerns the legal and compliance issue. There are other risks involved, business risks. Okay, so if you do not collect your data diligently and properly, chances are that you will not be able to use the data that you have collected to serve your needs. Okay, the data collected does not serve your needs. Incomplete data. Okay, so for example, if you have a data set with 1,000 rows of data, of which 500 rows comes with missing values, which means half of your data has missing values. Chances are that even if you use this data set for analysis, for analytics, it's not going to give you good outcomes because there are lots of missing fields. Some of them are missing fields. So your model is created based on this so-called poor quality data. So naturally, you're not going to make good business decisions. Okay, so after a while, okay, so you're not able to perform business operations, fulfill business agreements with clients and customers. And lastly, okay, monetary risk. Okay, so frauds, errors which lead to monetary losses. This is especially so true for the cases of e-commerce and the banks. Okay, so there are a lot of fraudulent cases around. Okay, so after making your online purchase, okay, you enter in your credit card details. All right. Basically, there is a risk that somebody would actually take your credit card details and use it for illegal purposes, leading to monetary losses. Okay, so monetary risk is one of those, which is why I think these days we are very particular about governance of this credit cards information. We usually require a two-tier authentication, all right, for our online transactions. All right, basically what we're trying to do is to prevent a third party from taking the data and use it. So which are the data governance domains? Okay, first thing you need to know, okay, is the data principles, which is the why. Why do I need this data? Okay, so collecting data is non-trivial. It takes a lot of time, effort to collect it. So we do not usually collect data unless we are sure that we're going to use it for some particular purpose. Okay, a study that we want to do. This is the data that we need, and before we go ahead and collect the data. And once we have collected the data, we ensure that sufficient protection is given to the valuable data. Okay, you don't want whatever data that you do, okay, is being accessed by unauthorized personnel, okay, who actually use it for other purposes apart from what you have described. Data quality. Okay, so this is important, especially when you have data from different different countries, different sources. How do you standardize the data formats, all right, to ensure that we have a certain data quality to be maintained? So I think one of the key things to look at is that we need to understand the requirements of the intended use of the data. So for example, if you are going to study the whether what is the profile of the students that will do well in exams, you probably wouldn't go and collect data that is related to the student matriculation number, because the student matriculation number is not related at all to how well a student will do in his course of study. Metadata, all right, so you want to keep a piece of metadata, okay, which is important. Okay, it describes what each attribute is, and to ensure that the data collected can be interpreted by the next user. All right, so anyone who takes over the project looks at the metadata, he knows what to do with the data. Access control, this is where we specify who can access the data. So typically in organizations, what we do is that we use access based on needs requirements. So we don't want to give people who don't need to. We don't want to give access to people who don't need to access the data. Okay, so it's basically on the needs basis. If you need it, you are given the right to access it. If you don't need the data, as far as possible, we don't give the data. And data life cycle. All right. So one of the things is that a data life cycle starts, the moment where we begin to collect the data. But unknown to many people, after collecting the data, using it for analysis and so on, there is a need to retire the data when you need them. So usually, as part of the governance process, even before collecting the data, we need to identify what are the data to be collected. We also need to establish how long we are going to store the data. If you're going to store the data for 3 years, we have to decide what we are going to do with the data 3 years down the road. How are you going to destroy the data so that no one else can use the data for other purposes? Okay. So these are some of the data, more further descriptions on what are the the key domains, data principles, what are the users of data for the business, how do we communicate the use of the data on an ongoing basis, what are the desirable behaviors, okay, when you use the data, how should you use it, okay. So for example, if your access rights is just to read the data alone, you should not be allowed to make changes to the data, okay. So the last thing you want is that everybody start to kind of make changes, then your data will lose integrity. So whenever you collect data, alright, so data collection is a non-trivial task. It takes a lot of time and effort. So after collecting the data, we typically also try to explore how can we share and use the data for other case studies that we want to do. How do we use it for other purposes? Alright. So for example, if you want to study about students' profile, you collect students' particulars, grades, and so on. We don't just we use it to analyze which are the students that perform well. We can also use it to analyze, what are the current topics, which are of interest to students, based on the take-up rate, and which are the topics that students tend to do well. Is it something to do with the lecturer, or is it more like the students have the correct background, prior to attending the course? The fifth one, so the regulatory environment. So in Singapore, for all the data that you collect, you need to comply with the existing guidelines for data privacy issues and so on. So for example, when you do a survey, you collect your these days you are no longer required to pass your IC for a survey, and then in your survey form, if you collect the names, collect the address, and all those things. So you have to bear in mind that these are all personal data, and we have to take special care to ensure that we comply with the Personal Data Protection Act in Singapore, when we collect this data. And lastly, what are the different kinds of classification and protection guidelines? So this is basically talking about how we classify data. So data can have confidential data, can be restricted data, can be non-sensitive data, and so on. So what we are trying to do here is that we classify the data according to their sensitivity and confidentiality. One thing to take note is that we try not to over-classify. So for example, if the data is does not contain confidential info, please do not classify it as confidential just because you are being kiasu or trying to be safe, because if you do that, what it means is that a lot of users who needs the data, but they can't access it because it's classified as confidential and not everybody can access it. So that is one of the scenarios that we want to prevent. So in terms of the roles, these are the people who are responsible for the data principles: the data governor, the owner, the steward, the supplier, and the consumer. Basically, it's a full suite of data, user, supplier, and the data governance. So data quality. Basically, what are the standards for data quality in terms of accuracy, timeliness, completeness, and credibility? So as I said, the data that we collect has to be accurate, has to be updated. So we cannot rely on the data that is that we have doubts on in terms of its inaccuracy. So why we say that? Because in data analytics, typically what we have is garbage in, garbage out. If you input poor quality data into your model, you're going to get poor quality answers. What is the program for establishing and communicating data quality? So you need someone who could be the subject matter expert to actually, and the data owner, to work with the data owner and to establish, okay, what is the data quality needed. So this also includes how, the quality of the data. So for example, when we talk about images typically comes with a different image resolutions. So if you only require a 1 cm resolution, let's not go for 1 mm resolution, which probably costs more to collect. So we need to establish what is the data quality we need, and just make sure we collect whatever we need, and not go into you're not going to collecting data that is even higher quality than what we need, because it's more costly to collect high quality data. So how will the data quality associated programs be evaluated? So there's where the data quality comes in. These are the people that QC the data. They're the one who decides if the data collected has the right quality for usage. So metadata, as mentioned, this is like a dictionary of data. It basically describes what are the data attributes in the data sets, what are the units of measures in the data set, and we do need this because the next user that comes in, who did not collect the data, who is new to the project, he or she can refer to the metadata to have a better sense of what is being done in the what data are being collected, what has been done with the project. Okay, so we need to document this, and this is called the metadata. So how will this how do we consistently define and model this data so that anyone can interpret it, and what is the plan to keep different types of metadata up to date? Okay, so whenever we collect new data, we need to update the metadata, alright, to include the new data that is being collected. So this is important. Data access. This has a lot to do with data security. What is the business value of data? So we collect data for a purpose. If it is something related to the financial situation of the company, that is of course secrets. And what is the business value that it brings? If that piece of data, alright, will affect the performance of the company. Okay, so that means it has a high business value. Okay, compared to data which has little or no impact on the performance of the company. So how will risk assessment be conducted on an ongoing basis? So while the data governor, the data owners, stewards can put in place a set of rules to govern how the data is being used. Typically there will be some users who do not follow rules, and hence how do we then detect this non-compliance, alright, and correct them. So we have to regularly carry out a risk assessment, assess if our measures that are put in place, are they adequate, okay, how can we do better, if there are any gaps, how should we fill them. So how do we then integrate these assessment results into the overall compliance monitoring efforts? So in short, what this is doing, what this meant is basically a data audit effort. Okay, we want to make sure that whatever data we collect, they are properly secured. People who don't need them don't have access to them. People who use them according to the guidelines that have been laid down. Okay, so in doing so, we need to know what are the data access standards and procedures. Okay, when you want to access the data, do you need to fill in a form? Whose approval do you need to seek, and so on? So there must be a proper process to govern the usage. And what is the duration for the periodic monitoring for compliance? Okay, do you do it once a month? Do you do it once a year? Okay, so it depends. It varies from company to company. Okay, depending on the confidentiality of the data, and also whether if the company has the has the right resources to conduct these checks on a more regular basis. And how is security awareness and education disseminated? What we mean is that you need to educate your office colleagues on data confidentiality, data access rights, and so on. So and very often there are new rules that come by. How do we ensure that they are kept well aware of the different security awareness and education issues? And lastly, okay, in the most unfortunate event where your data, somebody accesses your data, wipes out your data, and stores your system. Okay, how do we then retrieve a backup and allow the system to recover? Okay, and how fast should we get the system to recover? So these are things that we have to put in place as a so-called framework. A framework that's put in place. Okay, it states down the actions that we will do should there be a compromise. Okay, how do we do to activate the backup? How do we recover all the data? So in terms of a data life cycle, so the moment we start to carry out a data analytics exercise, first thing we need to do is decide what are the data that we want to collect, what is the units of measures, how do we link one data set to another data set. So these are things that we need to think through. What are the data definitions? How do we collect the data? How do we retain the data? Where do we store them? Do we password protect them? Do we store them on the cloud, or do we store them on the local database? And more importantly, very often after collecting data, and you say that you're going to keep the data for 5 years, you have to start thinking how you're going to dispose of the data after 5 years. So all this have to be planned upfront, including what you are going to do with the data at the end of the duration that the data is to be used. And and lastly, how do we ensure that how do the compliance issues affect data retention and archiving? So very often, if you don't comply with the rules and regulations, you don't retain the data, you don't archive them according to the guidelines that have been laid down, then there's a big tendency that the data sets that you have, they're going to you're going to compromise the integrity. So you need to have a set of rules. You need to get everybody to obey them. Everybody knows what to do. Everybody knows how to archive data, retain data, and so on. And at the end of the life cycle, we know how to dispose of the data. And in terms of responsibilities and practices, so in being a scenario of data collections, data principles, we need the data owner or consumer to justify capturing the location data for displaying on a Google map. So you have the control changes and potential impact through change management. So you collect the images, you display on Google Maps. So you also need to put in place what are some of the control measures. So for example, how often do you update the data? What kind of, how can the data be used, and so on. Data quality, the data owner to determine what level of precision within 10 meters or 500 meters. So as I said, if the precision is 500 meters, which means that you don't need to be that precise. Please don't collect data that is within 10 meters precision, because it's more costly to collect data with higher precision. And in doing so, you also need to decide where do we store the data properly. You need to collect, convert, or manipulate existing data that is of different format or precision. Alright, so we need to do some conversions and to so-called integrate all the data such that they are all consistent. We also need to carve out the metadata, all right, to determine, okay, the data attributes, what they mean, okay, what do they exactly represent, and where do we store the data, how do we use the data, and so on. And we have to adopt and enforce the same standard throughout the project so that the data can be easily interchanged. Access control, okay, so this is usually handled by Chief Information Security Officer, okay. So what it does is that, okay, it ensures that only those who need to access the data get to access. People who don't need them don't access them, and the data that we collect, they fulfill the prevailing rules, laws, and so on. So for example, in Singapore, we all have to comply with the Personal Data Protection Act, PDPA. So we have to ensure that whatever data that we collect do not go into the hands of a third party that don't require them. And lastly, in terms of data life cycle, okay, so you have to implement capturing of data. So for example, for transactions data, how often do we collect the data? Is it every hour, every half a day, or every day, on a daily basis, 24 hours? Okay, so do we keep downloading the data, or do we download the data at the end of the day? All right. So how do we support the data, all right, the displaying of this data in public domains? So for example, in Google Maps, we want to know the traffic conditions. Chances are that your data life cycle is actually very short, because you need to keep updating the data on the Google Maps to take into consideration the current traffic conditions, so you have to give the best estimates for the traveling time. Okay, so this is an example of a short data life cycle because of the need for the data to be updated regularly. Okay, and then we apply the data data life cycle. We also need to establish how often we need to back up the data. Okay, so for example, today even our mobile phones, so we have a lot of data in our phones. We typically have a backup either in the cloud, or we have a hardware device that we store the data. So how often do we store this backup, and how do we encrypt or mask potentially sensitive data? Okay, so this is an example, okay, of a illustration of an entire full business intelligence life cycle, starting from data source. How do we collect them? We do the extract, transform, and load, put them into data marts, data warehouse, extract them for analysis, and producing the outputs to be shared. Okay. So I think this is describes where each of these considerations comes in. Data governance, it comes in right up front. Okay, even before you start collecting any single piece of data. Okay, you need to get your data governance in place. Okay, so in data governance, you describe your data sources, where you're going to collect the data, how you're going to collect the data, how you're going to store the data, and so on. And then when you store the data, chances are that you might want to encrypt them. So that is where cryptography comes in. And then when you do analytics, how do you ensure that you deploy proper access controls such that only those who need to use the data get access to the data? And we also have practice security in data analytics to ensure that while the user extracts the data for analysis, it doesn't disrupt the integrity of the data. And right at the end, this is the end users who looks at the outputs from the different data analytics. From here, we have to see these are the different channels that the data analytics outputs can be on the web, can be on the mobile phones, okay, can be on the dashboards, and so on. So we have to be careful. Okay, so this is where you can have a data leakage, when we put it on the in the public domain. All right, anyone can download it and use it for purposes that are unknown to you, so you have to be careful of that. And lastly, okay, we talk about data life cycle. So as I said, okay, after collecting the data, using the data for analytics, okay, we must know when and how, okay, do we get rid of the data. Okay, if it's 5 years project, after 5 years, okay, we have to dispose of the data in a proper manner. In terms of Singapore's laws, okay, we have a few issues. Okay, legal and compliance requirements. The Personal Data Protection Act is what we typically all have to comply. Okay, so basically, in Singapore, I think things like NRIC numbers, your name, and so on. These are all personal data. And today, there are some strict laws. Okay. Under the PDPA, okay, to actually provide, it provides a framework on how we can collect this personal data and how we need to protect this personal data and how can we use this personal data. There's also a Computer Misuse and Cyber Security Act, which actually tackles the cyber security issues. We also have internet banking, okay, with increased usage of online banking services. There's also a risk management guidelines for internet banking. Other guidelines can be found under the US and internationals. Okay, so these are but in Singapore, I think the three on top, these are applicable to Singapore. Okay, so in terms of reflection questions, describe the domains in the data governance. Okay, describe domains in data governance. The answers can be found in slide 15, which are data principles, data quality, metadata, access control, and data lifecycle. So these are the 5 data governance domains that we have to manage. Okay, whenever we talk about data governance. Alright, so with that, that comes to the end of this lecture. Alright, thank you.